and you started before they.
Okay, Marilyn.
It was 10 years. It's every year.
Okay, I think we are ready to begin.
Yes.
Bob morning.
Okay. Today's series is we're starting a series called Positivity Bias. It's based on the book Positivity Bias, written by Mendel Kamen-Son. And the main idea of the book is that we all know that our brains are hyperwired to focus on negativity. And reporters, when they have to create a story, there was a reporter for the New York Times that recently shared that when he started as a journalist, so they sent him, he worked for the Pennsylvania newspaper, one of the publications there, and they sent him, go find out a story about the traffic patterns in the summer. And he was trying to interview people, and there was nothing newsworthy of the story. So he went to the police department. He said, is there anything going on over here? Anything out of the usual? Nothing really. Always in August, there's more traffic than in January. That's just the fact. So he was like fishing around. Finally, he found one police reporter who said that, the other day he's seen traffic that's really, really bad. Not unusual for August, but probably not a great outlier, but possibly the worst traffic he's ever seen in this area, which doesn't mean much. It doesn't say much because in context, there's not so much traffic to begin with. So to say that this is the most traffic he's ever seen in this area, wasn't such a sensational piece. But the way the reporter put the headline, police officer says that this is the highest level of traffic he's ever seen in his life. And that gets people to read the story, even though, in reality, there's nothing so significant here. So what we're going to do, and the premise of the book, is that we have to train ourselves, and we can train ourselves to see things in a positive aspect. And we will do that by looking at hundreds of stories and letters and anecdotes and vignettes from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and use those as a case study to teach us how to have a positive outlook and to see how the Rebbe did it. And we have to remember that the Rebbe himself had a very hard life. He lost his father, was sent to exile for many years, and he never saw his father again for many years. He lost his sister-in-law and brother-in-law, his brother. He lost so much. He was childless. He had so much to be down about. And he also heard the thousands of stories of people who came to him for help with difficulty in marriages or in loss of loved ones or any crises you can imagine, health emergencies. He heard it. And so he knew quite well and personally the negative of the world. And yet he chose not to see it that way. And it wasn't just wishful thinking, as we will see. It was actually a objective, well-structured system. And so we're going to discuss that. And in next week's lesson, we'll go into that more deeply. But in this week, we're going to focus more on, we're going through COVID-19, coronavirus, lockdown at home. Many of us may know people who've lost their lives. Some of us are out of work and have fear of financial future and many other different things. And so we're going to try to address that today in lesson 1, and then wait for a deeper dive into positivity bias and the whole worldview into next week. So when we're dealing with, and I'm going to be reading from different stories to build a case. So in general, many people have a natural worldview that they're in control of what happens. And then when something gets thrown on their path, they have difficulty dealing with that situation. So they either reject it or they get angry and frustrated. But what if we could change our frame of mind to say, actually, maybe God has a master plan, and the situation that I'm in right now was by design, and therefore this is not an obstacle in my path. It's actually part of my path and journey, and that could help us see things through a greater lens. So the first area I'm going to share is shared with us by a woman named Mrs. Miriam Swerdlove. So she shares that in 1967, she attended a Chabad-sponsored convention for women and girls that took place in Detroit. After the inspiring event, so they were waiting to board their flight for home, supposedly, assumingly New York, Crown Heights, and Miriam and about 20 other women learned that the flight was canceled due to a snowstorm. So you can imagine you have plans to be back home with your family. It doesn't say the date of the week, but I assume it was either the beginning of the week, Sunday, Monday, or close to the end of the week, Thursday, Friday. And the group rushed and they realized they're stuck in the airport and all their plans are put on hold. So the group rushed to a payphone and they called Chabad headquarters in New York, 770, and they asked the Rebbe what to do. So the leader of the group in the airport was Mrs. Miriam Popak. So she spoke with the Rebbe's secretary and said, "We are stuck in Detroit and we don't know what to do." So the secretary put Mrs. Popak on hold for a minute, and he came back on the line. He said, "The Rebbe doesn't understand the word stuck." So Mrs. Popak started to explain the word stuck means. So the secretary replied, "The Rebbe knows full well what stuck means. The Rebbe says that a Jew is never stuck. Wherever you are," and this is I'm sharing, but this wasn't in the conversation, but wherever you are, you're not stuck in the situation. If you're there, it's because you belong there. That's exactly where you need to be at this moment. So when the woman heard this, they're not stuck in the airport. They're meant to be in the airport right now for whatever reason. So they said, how can we use this time to be very productive and fruitful? And the press was in the airport because of the snowstorm and other things. So they used this as an opportunity to encourage other Jewish women in the airport to light Shabbat candles. And they had a bunch of candle kits. And so they gave out a bunch of candlesticks in the airport. And Mrs. Swerdlove concludes her story that there are women and families today all over the United States lighting Shabbat candles because we got stuck in Detroit. You know, so sometimes we feel got stuck, but maybe we're there for a very important reason. So as far as the Rebbe was concerned, you're never stuck. If you're waiting at a red light, there's a traffic accident, you're stuck in the airport, your job was terminated, whatever it is, you're not stuck. You belong there, and you're there for a specific reason. And as soon as you figure out the reason and you do it, you'll be able to move on. So many of us are feeling disoriented and unsettled by how our normal work and home routines and environments have been completely upended. So, and a lot of us have this feeling, you know, we're stuck between periods. In other words, if we knew that we'll be home for the next 3 weeks, so we can make a plan. Okay, I'm home for the next 3 weeks, so this is what I'll do in week 1, this is what I'll do in week 2. But because there's so much uncertainty in how long this will go on for, so that leaves people feeling like I can't set myself permanently for anything here because it may end soon or maybe it'll go on forever. And that itself can be very debilitating, the doubt and uncertainty. So here's the next story I'll share. And this is a story shared by Rebbe Avram Glick. He was newly married and he grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, and his bride was from Melbourne, Australia. So he started running youth activities in Worcester, Massachusetts. And after a time, a position opened up in Australia, which was extremely appealing or important. And so he took that role. He received the Rebbe's blessing for that role in Australia. But it took a few months for him to leave Worcester and move to Australia. So during that time, he felt like I can't really invest in any activities in Worcester because I'm going to leave in a few months. But I'm not in Australia, so I haven't. So he felt like in this in between. So at that time, he had a personal audience and meeting with the Rebbe, and he shared his state of mind. So the Rebbe told him something interesting. The Rebbe said, in the Torah, we find that the 40 years that the Jews were wandering in the desert, in the wilderness, they would sometimes stay in a place for just one day. And as we know, when the Jews were wandering the desert, they used to travel with a portable temple, the tabernacle. And that tabernacle had hundreds of different parts and thousands of different pieces. It had foundation sockets and wall sections and pillars and tapestries and furnishings, and a work crew of several thousand Levites assembled the sanctuary at each camp and dismantled and transported it when the divine command would come to move on. And yet, even if they would stay in a location for just one day, it was erected at every encampment, even for just a single day. So they had these thousands of workers unpacking and building the sanctuary, and then a day later, I apologize for that. And then the next day, unpacking it. Let me just mute this call. Give me a second. Okay. So that's quite a fascinating. So the Rebbe continued and continued with Rabbi Avram Glick. He said, the Talmud derives many laws from this, including the principle that if you find yourself in a place for even just one day, it is as though you are fixed there permanently. This teaches us that each and every one of our stations in life is significant unto itself. A person may find himself in a certain place or situation for a very brief period, and it may seem to him that he is merely on the way to some other place. Yet there is always something in that place or situation to be sanctified, something that can serve as a tent of meeting between heaven and earth. One should never live their life as though they are standing with a packed suitcase ready to go. So he threw himself into the youth activities fully, even though he knew he was only going to be there for another 2 months, because he said, while I'm in Worcester, I have to live as if I'm only in Worcester. And then when I get to Australia, I'll be fully in Australia. So something similarly, one of the greatest Jewish codifiers, poskim, of the last generation was Rav Moshe Feinstein. They say about him a story that, to finish the Talmud is quite a feat. But for Moshe Feinstein, he used to finish it quite often, quite regularly, maybe every 2-3 years. One time he finished the Talmud and he gathered his family and he said, I want to make a big celebration for this. I finished the Talmud. So they said, Father, you always finish the Talmud. What's so exciting about this one? They want to do such a great ceremony. He says, because this is the Talmud that I finished in 5 minutes. I said, you finished the Talmud in 5 minutes? He says, yeah. When I was waiting for the subway, I read I used those 5 minutes waiting for the subway to learn a piece of Talmud. When I was online in the store, at the bank, this was the Talmud that I finished in the 2 minutes here, the 5 minutes there, the 18 minutes that I had there. And it never felt like, oh, I'm just waiting and this time is just going to waste. Every minute is precious and we have to, so to speak, invest ourselves fully and live in it. And that's something that can really help us during this time of feeling, I'm here, but maybe in 2 weeks I'll be thrown back to work. Or we have to kind of live as if we're fully here in the moment and be productive about it and not miss the chance and the special minutes. So, and which is it's not a natural experience. We don't bring a cake to our hotel neighbor. Welcome in, welcome home. Our new neighbor, because it's transient. Everything's very temporary. But in certain sense, we have to live as if we're here to stay. Now, here's another story. And this story is shared by Reb Simon Jacobson. Tzvi, you could share this with Sai because Sai loves Rabbi Simon Jacobson. That he shares a story about his father. His father was hospitalized just before the high holidays, and Simon, the son, visited the Rebbe just before Yom Kippur, as is custom, that we receive honey cake from the rabbi of the shul, or for Hasidim, they receive it from their Rebbe. And they say, Rebbe, can we have some honey cake? And the Rebbe says, sure, this should be the only thing you have to ask for this entire year. Right? So that's a famous custom that Jews do, that the rabbi gives honey cake, they ask for the honey cake. So he waited online and he asked the Rebbe, can I have some honey cake? So the Rebbe gave him honey cake, and he also gave him a piece for his father. And he said, give this to your father. May God bless him with a sweet and healthy year. And then the Rebbe continued, tell your father that when he finishes the mission for which he was sent to the hospital, God will send him free from there. So, inspired by this message, the father in the hospital proceeded to initiate conversations with his doctors and fellow patients regarding their spiritual well-being. The day after Yom Kippur, the Rebbe sent his personal secretary to visit the man in the hospital. And this messenger from the Rebbe asked the man in the hospital, Rabbi Jacobson, I think his name is Gershon Jacobson, the father, the Rebbe wants to know, have you completed your mission here yet? Years later, after the father had passed, the family heard from one of his doctors, who said that he had been deeply touched by him and that his spiritual life had deepened and been redirected as a result of their conversations during his time in the hospital. So here the man thought he was in the hospital because he's ill. And yet the Rebbe told him, don't mix up the cause for the reason. The cause that you're in the hospital is because you're ill. But the reason you're in the hospital is because you have a mission to do there. And your mission is to engage the doctors or fellow patients and cheer them up, or share with them some spiritual insight, or whatever it is, share with them a mitzvah. We can never confuse the cause for the reason. Lastly, and with this we'll conclude today's lesson. It's a similar story from a Chabad rabbi in Connecticut named Rabbi Yisrael Darren and his wife Vivi. And they were building big operation in Stamford, Connecticut. And then everything came to a standstill because of a medical emergency with one of their children. And it put everything on hold. And so they were neglecting their many numerous projects. And so they used to send in monthly reports. And in that monthly report to the headquarters, they said because of their son's condition, he spent almost all of his time in the hospital to the neglect of his numerous other projects. So a short while later, the secretary returned to the line and said, the Rebbe says that certainly God didn't make such a thing happen so that you should suffer or be anguished because of it. Surely if you're sent to the hospital, it's because you have a special shlichus, a special mission to do there. Go and find it and do it. So when he from then on, his whole being in the hospital changed. No more was he a victim, but he was actually a man on an important mission. So his whole attitude changed. Instead of feeling, oh, I'm stuck here at the hospital, he felt, I'm here to bring benefit or to be helpful in whatever way I can. And so that's what he spent the next few weeks doing when he was at the hospital, is instead of just waiting around for the doctors to save his child's life, and so he was just a hapless victim, he also became a contributor in the hospital in the best way that he can. And it changed the entire experience for him and the doctors and the nurses and the other patients there as well. So in summary, we should think back to a time that we felt stuck and how we reacted during that time, and how we might have reacted differently had we been aware that this is by divine providence and we're here because we need to be here and there's some important mission to accomplish. And more contemporarily, the fact that we're all stuck at home or wherever we are, to consider, why God put us here. So of course, the cause is coronavirus, but that's not the reason that we're stuck at home. The reason is very unique to every single person. Maybe it's self-improvement, maybe it's to help another person. And we're not prophets. We don't know clearly what our mission is, but we definitely know that we're on a mission and we have to go and find it and do it. So that's for this week. Thank you everyone for joining. And till next week, we'll continue lesson 2 of positivity bias. And this Tuesday, we'll be doing at 7 o'clock or 7:30, actually 7:30, cultivating character, a course on ethics, which will also be a 35-minute lesson. So thank you for joining, everyone.
Could you do me a favor, please?